Hi, I'm Alan and this is Prayers to the Dice Gods, and today we're going to be looking at the magic that is brush control. Watch as I attempt to use my wizardry powers to paint a model. Now, if, like me, when you're watching these other YouTubers paint these models, you're thinking, what on earth wizardry is this? How can they perform these kind of techniques with a brush that's that big and not screw it up? Because I know every time I try to do some of this stuff with a big fat brush, it doesn't work. And then I thought about it, and then I watched the videos. And what they're telling me to do and what they're actually doing are actually different things. Now this is where the wizardry comes in, because I don't think a lot of these high-end painters actually notice that they paint differently to the majority of people, and that's why they use things like a size 4 brush. Okay, so our first YouTuber that we're going to feature is a friend of mine. It's Stu, that Mr. Shy. I've known him for a very long time. In fact, it's his paintwork that has inspired this video. Now, when we first started collecting and painting some 20 odd years ago, sitting and watching him just do something simple like put a wash onto a model, the way he moved his brush gave him an effect at the end that far exceeded anything I was able to do. So let's take a quick look at some of the paintwork that he does.
Lighting here and there, picking out areas.
Did anybody else just see that? There is no way that is the kind of brush control that these high-end painters are talking about. He's just done the edge on that with the tip of his brush. Now, most people struggle to do that with the edge of the brush, and he gets it looking perfect.
List of red, and I'm going to be building these up, making them thinner and thinner, bringing them closer and closer to the raised edges, so they're going to look like highlights, but they're also going to represent a cloth texture, sort of a thick kind of coloured hessian or something like that.
So I know Stu uses a size 3 Rosemary & Co. brush, which has a tiny little guide hair on the top, and he's just done lots and lots of lines to highlight a piece of fabric to make it look like it's got a kind of hessian kind of look to it. If that's not wizardry, I do not know what is.
Shade of Agrax Earthshade, just a nice liberal all over.
It's dark magic now. This is dark magic. Now watch the way he puts the wash onto the model. That's just not how it's done. If you watch the Games Workshop videos on how to put this stuff on, that's not how they do it. Now, there's a lot of high-end painters out there that will do it the way you can see here, which is some sort of dark magic. So up next we have Lyla, the mini witch. I am a massive fan of her work. She does some absolutely fantastic paint jobs. And I noticed that she paints in a very similar way to all of the other high-end painters. So we're going to take a quick look at some of her work. Watch the way she uses her paintbrush.
When I'm creating glaze mixtures or doing wet blending, I do tend to prefer to use the Vallejo glaze medium, as I think that it disperses the pigments more evenly, therefore allowing me smoother.
Now, I consider myself a reasonable painter, and I was sitting here watching that clip, and you barely see her brush move, but you can clearly see that it's doing things, because that face looked pretty good already, and she's only done half of it.
Than one too thick layer that could obscure details, and it's just too risky for me to possibly build up unwanted texture.
Now here, Lyla is showing exactly why she's the mini witch, that the entire thing is just... how? There's got to be magic involved. There's no way a brush can move that way on its own.
Reaper paints, a lot of time, I don't have to thin them down at all.
And here Lyla finally shows us that the paintbrush can be used in the way that us mere mortals think that it should be. You know, it's got a big long body and a fine tip, and we think that you should be using all of that. But apparently, for most things, that's not actually the case.
Your layer consistency should be the exact same as your base color. The goal for a layer and a base coat are the same. Apply as opaque of a paint as possible. The only difference is that layering is done on specific areas to build up highlights and shadows.
One of the things I noticed that Lyla does a lot is she does a lot of micro movements and movements of the actual model while she's painting, particularly when she's doing something that's quick like this, where she's trying to apply the layers fairly fast. So she's moving the model at the same time as her brush, and I think that helps with her blends, because there's some really nice blending going on here from her deep shadows right through to her highlights. And if you watch the micro movements when she applies the first lot of brush strokes compared to when she's doing the fine lines at the end, you'll see a difference. Right, we're on to Dana Howl next. I'm a huge fan, and I've noticed in a lot of her videos it genuinely looks like she's painting with magic. It's almost like she just waves the brush over the top of the model and the paint moves itself around. This is how good she is with her brush control.
And on the raised areas it will act more like a very thin glaze, just slightly tinting the white to give it a more earthy feel. After that we can branch out, applying this over some of the other colors such as the reds and the golds, and it will act in a similar way, slightly tinting the color but mostly just helping to redefine.
And here we have another case of dark magic. There's no other way to explain the way that these painters move shades around. It makes no sense. How on earth can you make it look that good with next to no brush strokes? There's got to be dark magic.
The most raised areas on the white cloth of the models. We want to be very subtle when we're highlighting and try to leave some areas covered with the shade or just a little bit of the shade in order to create a nice transition from dark to light. If you make a mistake during any of these steps, don't worry. You can always reshade using our Agrax Earth Shade and then try again.
Dana has such fine motor controls when it comes to her brush strokes that honestly, half the time, if it wasn't for the fact I could see the paint appearing on the model, I'd be thoroughly convinced that she was literally waving that over the top.
And look like metal. We're going to use our edge highlighting technique here that we used in some of the other videos, just using the side of our brush in order to apply these highlights. We can also do the same.
Now Dana here is showing us next level magic skills. She's telling us one thing when she actually is doing something else. What she said is that we're doing the edge highlight using the side of the brush. Now though that's technically true, what she actually means is she's using the top fifth of the brush on the side, not the body, because if you try to use the actual body of the brush, especially one at that size, it's going to just make a massive blob on the model. We're on to Sam Lenz, and the reason I really wanted to include Sam in this is because he uses synthetic brushes while most of the other painters tend to use Kolinsky sable brushes. Now the reason that's such a big deal, especially for those of us that are beginners or people wanting to learn more, is he uses the same techniques. He uses the brushes in the same way he would if it was a Kolinsky sable brush. So what you need to watch here is he's doing the same thing as all of the other painters that we featured. He's using the tip of the brush.
Just for the sake of example, is figure out exactly where that light is falling in the most major areas.
Now watching Sam as he applies his first lot of paint, it seems to be rough, but if you watch the way he moves that brush, on the other hand, there's a confidence, there's a deliberate, and the brush doesn't actually move that much. Because he's using the tip, he's not having to apply that much pressure, it's just gentle strokes of the brush.
Yellow mixture in place, then I'll take some of that black and yellow mixture, sweep it into these other areas. We'll take some even more black in that mixture. See, I'm going to be mixing and matching right on the palette.
Watching Sam wet blend on this blade, and the angle, maybe it's the angle the camera's at or the angle he actually holds his brush at, but it does look like he's using more of the belly of the brush when in actual fact he isn't. He's literally giving the tip a bit of a wiggle, and it's mixing the paint up. He does a lot of, I'd call them micro movements with his brush, which really improve the way his wet blends look.
And right here, I want to make sure that this edge highlight is particularly bright, seeing as this reflection is running right across the face of this axe.
The only conclusion I can come to here is that Sam worships at least one of the Chaos Gods. This is pure black magic. Well, going through just a small sample that I've done here, I tried to keep things consistent, so I've only used one video from each of these YouTubers. Believe me, I could have used a lot more. Now, the thing that you notice, well, the thing that I noticed while going through this is there's a lot of micro movements with the brushes. There's just little flicks of the tips when they're doing a blend or when they're doing a highlight. They only use the top fifth of the brush for 90% of the work. That includes putting the base coats on. So the conclusion has to be here. When you're worried that the YouTuber is using a particular brush to do a technique or to paint their models, if you think that that paintbrush will make you paint like them, it won't. It is literally, it's all about your brush control. The better you get with your brush, less of your brush that you apparently use means that you can use a bigger brush, which means it holds more paint. That makes perfect sense with the way they use the brushes. They load up the belly of the brush that holds enough paint for them to do most of the jobs they want it to do without having to keep reloading. Which of course, I think accounts for smoother blends, because when you're having to go back to your palette all the time, it gives the paint a little bit of time to dry, which can then give you a little bit of a texture when you go back. Now, the other conclusion we could come to is that these guys are worshippers to some sort of god or chaos god, or I don't know, with the way they move these paints around, I'm pretty sure it's one of the chaos gods. That's how they're getting their powers, that's how they make it look like they're not really painting the model at all, but it comes out looking amazing. Don't forget to subscribe and click on the bell icon so that you get all of the notifications as and when the new videos are released. The Dice Gods favour the painted army. Are you still here? There are links to the 4 YouTubers in the description. That's where you should be right now. Get on there, get subscribed to them, watch some absolutely fantastic painting videos.